The snow fell silent that night, right before the screaming started. They came for his sister, a single mother alone in a frozen town. But what they didn't know was that her brother wasn't just a man. He was a seal, a soldier forged in storms and faith. When evil lit the fire, heaven answered with ice. One man, one dog, and one miracle would turn that town into holy ground. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals over Silver Ridge, Colorado, a mountain town wrapped in silence and breath that steamed in the cold. Inside the small bakery at the corner of Willow Street, the air was warm, sweet, and heavy with the scent of cinnamon and melted butter. The place was called Collins' Hearth, a name that still felt too large for its owner, Emma Collins, a 28-year-old single mother who moved through her shop with a quiet determination that life had forced upon her. Emma was of medium height, her frame slender from long hours of kneading dough and carrying sacks of flour. Her hair was chestnut brown, always tied in a messy bun that loosened near her temples, and her eyes, gray with a hint of blue, held the tired kindness of someone who had learned to smile even when she wanted to cry. Her hands were small, the nails trimmed and worn smooth by work, and a faint burned scar on her left wrist whispered of old mistakes and nights when she had worked past exhaustion. That morning, she wiped a streak of flour from her cheek, glanced toward the frosted window, and smiled at the sound of a child's laughter. Lily Collins, her 7-year-old daughter, was crouched near the counter, drawing shapes on the fogged glass with her finger. Lily had inherited her mother's gray eyes, but none of her quiet reserve. She was a spark in the cold, a thin, lively girl with a tumble of curly blonde hair that caught the light like spun sugar. She was wearing a red sweater 2 sizes too big, one that used to belong to her father before he died in a construction accident 4 winters ago. Lily didn't remember much of him, but Emma remembered everything. His laughter echoing down this very street, the sound of his boots on hardwood, the promise that the hearth would one day be the town's beating heart. It had been 4 years since that promise turned to an empty space at her side, and every loaf she baked was, in some way, a prayer to keep that space filled with warmth. The clock above the counter ticked toward noon. The morning rush had passed, and the quiet of the shop was a comfort until the bell over the door jingled sharp and out of rhythm. 3 men entered, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the faint metallic smell of oil and cigarettes. The first was Jinx Turner, a wiry man in his 30s with slicked back black hair and a jawline that twitched when he smiled. His eyes were the color of dirty glass, always scanning, calculating, never still. He wore a denim jacket over a hoodie and fingerless gloves, the kind that made him look like he wanted to seem casual, but couldn't hide the restlessness beneath. Jinx was not from Silver Ridge. People said he drifted from town to town doing collections for a man named Silas Blackwood, a name that made even the sheriff go quiet. Behind him lumbered Knox, a mountain of muscle in a leather coat. His face looked carved out of granite, his nose bent slightly from an old break, and his eyes dull, the look of someone who followed orders because thinking hurt. The third, Rat, was small and twitchy, with sharp cheekbones and hands that moved like frightened birds. His teeth were yellow from cheap cigarettes, and he giggled at nothing, as though the world itself was a private joke he couldn't stop hearing. Emma froze with the cloth still in her hand. "We're closed for lunch," she said, her voice steady, but her heart tightening. Jinx's grin widened. "Lunch can wait, sweetheart. We're here for business. You're the owner, right? Miss Collins?" His voice had a sandpaper softness, mocking, careful, dangerous. Emma nodded. "That's right. What kind of business?" "Protection," Jinx said simply, leaning on the counter as if the place belonged to him. "Silas likes to make sure the good folks of Silver Ridge stay safe. Snowstorms, gas leaks, accidents, they happen fast around here. We make sure they don't." Emma's stomach turned. "I don't need protection," she said, glancing at Lily, who was now watching from the stairs that led to their small upstairs apartment. "I have an alarm system and good neighbors." Jinx chuckled, tapping his knuckles on the counter. "Alarms don't put out fires, honey. And neighbors, they mind their own business these days." His eyes shifted toward Lily. "Cute kid. Be a shame if someone scared her by mistake." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She straightened, placing herself between them and her daughter. "You need to leave?" Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from anger that burned deep and quiet. Knox took a slow step forward, his boots thudding against the wooden floor. "Lady," he rumbled, "you're not listening." Lily whimpered, clutching the banister. "Mommy!" Emma's heart pounded in her ears. She knew that if she screamed, no one would come fast enough. The bakery was at the end of the street, half buried in snow. She tried to remember the emergency button Luke had installed beneath the counter. A small gray switch connected to her brother's phone and the local police line. Her hand drifted toward it, slow, careful. Jinx noticed. His smile vanished. In one fluid motion, he grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to make her gasp. "Don't." His breath smelled of stale beer and peppermint. "You got 24 hours, Miss Collins. $500. We'll be back for the payment." He let go and turned toward the door, but not before sweeping his arm across the counter. A display of pastries crashed to the floor, scattering crumbs across the tile. Knox laughed. Rat followed, muttering something about the smell of fear. When the door finally shut behind them, the shop fell into silence again, except for Lily's sobs. Emma knelt down, pulling her daughter into her arms. She whispered, "It's okay. It's okay, baby." Though her own voice shook, she held the girl until her tears ran dry, until the ticking clock was the only sound left. Upstairs, the phone on the counter buzzed. A video call request. Luke Collins, her brother, appeared on the cracked screen, broad-shouldered, tanned from years under foreign suns, his short brown hair damp with sweat. His face had the calm precision of a soldier, but his eyes softened when he saw her. Luke was 35, built like a man forged from discipline. A faint scar ran along his right jawline, and a deeper one beneath his collarbone spoke of battles that still haunted his sleep. "Em, you okay? I thought you'd be baking now," he said. She forced a smile. "Just a long morning. Nothing I can't handle." Then Lily leaned into view. "Uncle Luke, we had bad men." Emma froze, her stomach dropping. Luke's expression changed instantly. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by focus, sharp as a knife. "What men?" he asked, his voice calm but deadly quiet. Emma tried to brush it off. "It's fine. Just some idiots." "Emma," he interrupted, "show me the window." She turned the phone, and the screen flickered, as the camera caught a reflection of boot prints melting into the snow outside. Luke's jaw tightened. Behind him, a German shepherd, Ranger, gray-black coat flecked with white around the muzzle, lifted his head. The dog was 6 years old, a retired Navy K-9 with deep amber eyes and an old bullet scar near his hind leg. He was silent, but alert, watching Luke's every movement. "I'm coming home," Luke said. "Luke, no, please." The screen froze, then cut to black as the signal faltered in the storm that was rolling toward Silver Ridge. Outside, the snow had thickened into a curtain. Emma stared at her reflection in the window and saw her fear looking back at her. Somewhere beyond the mountains, her brother was already moving, and the storm, both in the sky and in her life, was only beginning. By the time Luke Collins crossed the state line into Colorado, the sky had turned the color of bruised metal. Snow whipped across the highway in long, furious veils, and the headlights of his black pickup cut through the storm like a blade. He hadn't slept in 30 hours. The last thing he'd heard from his sister was a choked breath and the echo of Lily's frightened voice before the connection went dead. Ranger sat beside him on the passenger seat, his amber eyes fixed ahead. The German shepherd was unnervingly still, his head resting against the dashboard, ears twitching at the sound of every gust. His gray-black coat was dusted with flakes, and his breath fogged the window. Luke reached over, resting a hand on the dog's broad neck. "Almost there, buddy." Ranger blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if he understood. When they finally rolled into Silver Ridge, the streets were near empty, blanketed in white. The bakery's sign, Collins' Hearth, was half buried under snow. Luke parked by the curb and stepped out, his boots crunching on the ice. The town looked smaller than he remembered, like it had been swallowed by the cold. He pushed open the bakery door. The smell of smoke and flour hit him at once. The display cases were shattered, the cash drawer half open, the floor littered with crumbs and shards of glass. There was a smear of blood on the counter where Emma's hand must have struck when she fell. His jaw tightened, and something behind his ribs went cold. Ranger trotted in quietly, nose low, tail stiff. He sniffed near the counter, the door, the window, circling twice before stopping beside the back door. His ears pricked, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Luke knelt beside him. "Yeah," he murmured, "I smell it too. Stale cigarettes, motor oil, fear." He flicked on his phone's flashlight, moving behind the counter. There, near the floorboard, he found the small gray switch he'd built into the wood, a panic button connected to his number and the police frequency. It had been pressed, but the signal must have been blocked by the storm. The thought made him clench his fists. He walked toward the window, scanning the street. Across the way, a neon sign flickered faintly above a coffee shop still open. Inside, a woman was wiping down tables. Luke crossed the street, Ranger following at his heel. The bell chimed softly as he entered. The woman looked up, startled. She was in her 40s, tall, with broad shoulders and a mane of wavy red hair tied back with a ribbon. Her name tag read Nancy Greer. Her eyes, hazel, sharp, measured him quickly. "Kitchen's closed, soldier," she said, her tone cautious. Luke managed a thin smile. "Not here for coffee. I'm looking for my sister, Emma Collins. You might have seen her." Nancy's face changed. She put down her cloth slowly. "You're her brother?" She didn't ask. She already knew. "You'd better sit." She poured him a cup of coffee anyway, steaming and black. "3 men came in yesterday," she said quietly. Locals call them Jinx, Knox, and Rat. They've been shaking down half the town since Christmas. Said they work for some guy down in Denver. She told them to leave. Brave girl. But brave don't scare men like that. Luke's knuckles whitened around the cup. What happened after? They left. Sheriff didn't do much. Nancy hesitated, then added, They came back after dark. I saw their truck drive past my window. Old red Chevy, no plates, one headlight out. Parked behind the bakery. Then I heard glass. I called the sheriff's office. No one answered. Her voice faltered. When the storm hit, they were gone. Luke stood, pulling on his gloves. Thanks. He dropped a 20 on the counter. Nancy frowned. You're going after them? He didn't answer, but the way he adjusted his jacket said enough. She sighed, shaking her head. There's a storm advisory. Roads'll freeze over. Luke looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened. They hurt my sister. There's no storm worse than that. He left before she could reply. Back at the bakery, Ranger paced by the door, anxious. Luke checked the locks, then crouched by the broken shelf. Under a scattering of flour, he found something small, a crushed cigarette butt with a faded logo, Silver Crown. He slipped it into his pocket. He'd seen that brand before, smoked only in certain truck stops near Denver, usually by men working for a name whispered in the darker corners of his world, Silas Blackwood. Luke had heard of him when he was still active duty, former logistics officer turned smuggler, a man who hid contraband in cargo routes across the Rockies. Clever, rich, untouchable. He sat on the floor, leaning against the counter, staring at the empty space where his sister had stood the day before. He remembered her laughter, her letters, the way she used to send him photos of Lily with flour on her cheeks. He hadn't realized how much of his heart lived inside this little shop until now. Ranger came to him and placed his head in Luke's lap. Luke rubbed the dog's ear, voice low. We're going to fix this, boy. Hours passed. Outside, the storm worsened. Snow swallowed the streetlights, turning everything into a blur of gray and white. Luke finally dozed off on the floor, half awake, Ranger beside him. Then came the faint crunch of tires outside. Ranger's ears lifted. Luke's eyes snapped open. The truck's engine idled just long enough for him to hear the creak of metal. He crawled toward the window and peered through the curtain. Headlights. A silhouette moved behind the glass of the red Chevy, its single working headlight glowing like a cyclops' eye. Luke reached for the pistol holstered under his coat. Ranger's hackles rose. The truck door slammed. Footsteps approached the bakery, crunching in the snow. 3 figures again. Jinx, Knox, and Rat. They stood outside, talking low. Jinx held something in his hand, a can, metallic. Luke's stomach sank. Gasoline. He motioned to Ranger to stay low. The door rattled once, then again. A voice hissed, We said 24 hours, sweetheart. Luke didn't move. He counted the steps, memorized the rhythm. 3 men, 2 outside, 1 near the side window. He knew their type. He'd faced men like them before, in places where mercy was optional. He whispered, Now, and opened the door with a violent shove. The first blow hit Knox square in the chest, sending him stumbling into the snow. Jinx swung a crowbar. Luke ducked, countering with a knee to the gut. Rat yelped and ran toward the truck, fumbling with the handle. Ranger bolted forward, slamming into him, the dog's weight taking the smaller man down. Snow exploded around them in a cloud of white. Rat screamed as teeth clamped on his sleeve, not his flesh. Luke didn't kill, not yet. He grabbed Jinx by the collar, slamming him against the truck hood. "Where's Silas?" he growled. Jinx spat blood. "You don't know who you're messing with." Luke pressed harder. "Then tell him I'm home." He released the man and shoved him back into the snow. The three scrambled, slipping, cursing, before piling into the truck and roaring off into the blizzard. Ranger stood beside Luke, panting, eyes bright. Luke watched the red taillights disappear into the storm. He could have chased them, but he didn't. Not yet. He turned back to the bakery, his breath misting in the cold air. The door creaked behind him, and he noticed something glinting near the tire tracks. A silver pendant, small and heavy, stamped with a crest of a black tree, and the initials S.B. Luke picked it up, turning it over in his palm. He recognized it from the military database he'd once had access to, a private insignia used by a logistics firm in Denver owned by Silas Blackwood. He pocketed it. The storm screamed outside, battering the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Luke knew what it meant. The game had just begun. The next morning broke gray and bitter, the kind of cold that made even breath feel heavy. Snow had stopped falling, but a thick fog lingered low over Silver Ridge, swallowing sound and color alike. Luke Collins stood in front of the bakery's scorched sign, the silver pendant in his palm. The initials S.B. gleamed faintly under the dim light. He slipped it back into his pocket and turned toward the police station 2 blocks down. The station was a squat brick building with a rusting flagpole and a single truck idling out front. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and old paper filled the air. The sheriff, Earl Wesson, looked up from behind a cluttered desk. Earl was in his 50s, with thinning blonde hair combed carefully over a sun-spotted scalp. His belly pushed against his badge, and his mustache drooped like wet straw. But his pale blue eyes were wary, quick, eyes of a man who'd seen enough bad winters to know when to keep his head low. "Well, if it isn't Emma's brother," Earl said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Heard you made a mess last night." Luke ignored the tone. "3 men tried to burn my sister's shop. I stopped them. They work for Silas Blackwood." The sheriff's expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of unease. "That a fact?" he asked. "You got proof?" Luke dropped the pendant on his desk. "Enough?" Earl stared at it, then exhaled through his nose. "Son, I've been sheriff here 15 years. Every time someone mentions that name, bad things follow. My advice? Take your sister and go. Folks who cross Silas don't tend to last long." Luke's jaw tightened. "That's not an option." A voice spoke from the doorway. "He's right, Luke." Emma stood there pale and exhausted, wrapped in her father's old winter coat. Her right cheek was bruised, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes were steady. "You can't fight these people." Luke turned toward her. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," she lied. "Lily's at Mrs. Greer's cafe. She's safe for now." She looked at Earl. "Sheriff, are you going to help us or not?" Earl sighed, rubbing his temple. "Miss Collins, I'll file a report, but that's all I can do. Denver jurisdiction's messy. Blackwood's got half the logistics permits in the state. He's untouchable." Luke took a step closer to the desk, voice low. "Then I'll make him touchable." As they left the station, Emma caught her brother's arm. "Luke, please, I don't want you dragged back into—" "Into what?" he asked. "Surviving? Protecting my own?" He looked away, the old shadows in his eyes deepening. "This isn't war," she whispered. "It is to them," he said. By noon, Luke was driving down the icy mountain road that led out of Silver Ridge, Ranger beside him. He had one lead, a warehouse near Denver, tied to the silver-crowned cigarette brand. The drive was long, treacherous, the road flanked by walls of white snow. When he finally reached the outskirts of the city, the scenery changed. Steel buildings, cranes frozen in mid-motion, trucks lined up like beasts in hibernation. The warehouse sat behind a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. He parked a block away, grabbed his binoculars, and watched. Two men guarded the front. One was tall, with a shaved head and a scar running from his ear to his neck. Vince, maybe late 30s, built like a dock worker. His hands were scarred from years of heavy lifting, his stance disciplined but weary, the look of someone who once believed in rules and lost that faith long ago. The other was younger, maybe mid-20s, thin, jumpy, smoking a cigarette he didn't seem to enjoy. Milo, a kid who probably thought this job would make him important. They didn't notice the man watching them from the shadows of a snowdrift. Luke waited until dusk. Then he moved. He and Ranger slipped through a broken section of the fence, silent as ghosts. The guard lights hummed faintly, but fog cloaked their movements. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. He crouched behind a stack of crates marked Blackwood Freight and Storage. Through the crack in the door ahead, he saw them. 6 men sitting around a table, counting money, drinking coffee. And at the head of the table sat Silas Blackwood himself. Silas was taller than Luke had expected, well over 6 feet, with neatly combed silver hair and a face carved from control. He wore a charcoal suit even here in this cold warehouse, and his tie was perfectly knotted. His skin was pale, but not unhealthy. His eyes, gray as the storm outside, were sharp and cold. When he smiled, it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, the kind that belonged to men who made others disappear quietly. He was in his late 40s, but there was something timeless about him, something that made Luke's instincts hum with danger. Silas was talking to a man seated at his right, Drake Holler, his lieutenant, a broad-shouldered brute with a broken nose and a jagged beard streaked with gray. Drake had once been a Marine, dishonorably discharged for smuggling weapons out of Kabul. His voice was deep, his tone dismissive. The Collins woman's just a message. Nobody cares about her bakery. Silas sipped his coffee. Her brother will. He already does. He placed a single photo on the table, Luke's military record, his service number, his face in uniform. He's efficient, controlled, and stubborn. He's going to make a move, and when he does, we'll be ready. Luke felt a pulse of cold rage in his chest. They already knew he was coming. He scanned the room, spotted a security camera facing the far corner. That meant someone else was watching. He whispered to Ranger, "We're done here." But as he turned, a faint sound behind him, a click, froze him mid-step. Vince, the scarred guard, had found his trail. "You lost, friend?" Vince said, raising his rifle. Luke spun, knocking the barrel aside, and they collided hard against the crate. The shot went wide, echoing through the warehouse. Inside, chaos erupted. Men shouted, chairs scraped. Silas rose slowly from his seat, expression unbothered. "Bring him in." Luke fought fast and quiet, striking Vince in the throat, dropping him to the ground. Milo appeared at the entrance, eyes wide, finger trembling on the trigger. He fired, the bullet grazing Luke's shoulder. Ranger lunged, taking Milo down in a blur of fur and teeth. Luke fired a warning shot overhead, scattering the rest of the guards long enough to run. He bolted through the side exit, the icy wind slicing across his face. Sirens began wailing in the distance. He sprinted toward the truck, blood soaking his sleeve. Ranger jumped into the passenger seat as Luke slammed the door and gunned the engine. As they sped down the road, the radio crackled, a voice calm and cold. "You're fast, Mr. Collins, but you can't outrun winter forever." It was Silas. Luke's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The signal cut off. Ahead, the road vanished into the white, and somewhere in that storm, danger waited. He didn't see the black SUV following him until its headlights appeared in the mirror. The chase began. The road out of Denver turned to glass as freezing rain hardened into sleet. Luke Collins drove with one hand pressed to the wound in his shoulder, the other gripping the wheel tight enough for his knuckles to pale. Ranger sat beside him, chest rising and falling in calm rhythm, though the German shepherd's golden eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror every few seconds. Behind them, the black SUV kept its distance. No headlights, just a dark shape sliding through the storm. Luke's breath fogged the inside of the windshield. "They want to chase," he muttered. He turned onto a narrower road leading into the forested ridge north of town. Snow lashed sideways now, thick and relentless. The truck fish-tailed on a patch of ice before finding traction again. Ranger gave a low growl, not of fear, but anticipation. "Easy, boy. We play this smart." He turned off his headlights and killed the engine near an abandoned ranger station half buried in snow. The building was old, its wooden siding warped and gray, windows half boarded. A sign hung crooked near the door. "Silver Ridge Fire Lookout. Closed for season." Luke motioned to Ranger, and they slipped out into the dark. The snow swallowed their tracks almost as fast as they made them. They reached the edge of the tree line just as the SUV rolled into view, creeping along the road with predator patience. Inside the vehicle sat 3 men. The driver, Tanner Briggs, was a wiry ex-mercenary in his early 40s with a serpent tattoo coiled along his neck. His beard was trimmed close, his eyes sharp and humorless, a man who treated violence as a job to be done cleanly. Beside him in the passenger seat, Rico Valles, younger, maybe 30, of Cuban descent, wore a black tactical coat and fingerless gloves. His mouth twitched when he smiled, rarely from joy, mostly from adrenaline. He was a talker, and even now he muttered, "He's in these woods. Bet my bonus on it." The third man in back, Harlan Deeks, was bulkier, ex-prison muscle with a shaved head and a faded spider tattoo on his scalp. He cleaned the barrel of his rifle with lazy confidence. "Then stop yapping and drive," Harlan said. Luke watched from the trees, blood crusted on his sleeve, eyes narrowed. These weren't street thugs. They were trained, Silas's hunters. He waited until they passed, then circled behind the SUV, moving through the trees like a shadow. Ranger followed at his heel, body low, tail still. They reached a small clearing where the road curved sharply along a frozen creek. Luke whispered, "Wait for my mark," and climbed the embankment. He picked up a chunk of ice the size of his hand and threw it into the road. It cracked loudly against the surface. The SUV stopped. Rico stepped out first, gun drawn, scanning the dark. "You see that?" he called. Tanner cut the engine but left the lights on, bathing the snow in a pale glow. "Check it," he said. Harlan grumbled, stepping out too, rifle ready. That was their mistake. Luke moved fast, catching Rico by the collar and driving him into the snow. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Before Harlan could turn, Ranger lunged from the dark, slamming the man's legs out from under him. Gunfire cracked, echoing across the valley. Luke wrested the pistol from Rico's grasp and swung it hard into the man's jaw. The shot had drawn Tanner from the driver's seat. He fired twice toward the trees, bullets shredding bark inches from Luke's head. Luke grabbed Rico's dropped flashbang, yanked the pin, and threw it toward the SUV. It detonated with a blinding burst of white and sound. Tanner staggered, cursing. Luke tackled him before he recovered, slamming him against the hood. Snow hissed on hot metal. The two men grappled, grunting, fists connecting in short, brutal arcs. Tanner was quick, trained, but Luke was relentless. A knee to the ribs, an elbow to the temple, and Tanner dropped. Luke cuffed him with his own zip ties and dragged him behind the SUV. Ranger stood over Harlan, teeth bared, muzzle flecked with snow. The big man was breathing, but out cold. Luke crouched beside Tanner. "You tell Silas this is over?" Tanner spat blood, laughing through split lips. "Over? You don't get it, soldier. You think you're hunting him, but he's using you to clean his mess. You're burning his trash for him." Luke's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? Those men you dropped in Denver, Vince, Milo, they weren't ours anymore. They were leaking info to the cops. You saved them the trouble." Tanner's grin was sickly, defiant. "And now, you're part of it." Luke didn't answer. He hit him once, hard enough to silence him, then stood. The revelation churned like acid in his chest. Had Silas baited him deliberately? He needed clarity, and there was one man who might have it. Sheriff Earl Wesson. Luke loaded the two conscious mercenaries into the SUV, zip-tied and gagged. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat as he drove back toward town, headlights cutting through the thickening snow. It was near dawn when they pulled into Silver Ridge. The station's lights were off, but Luke saw movement inside, a shadow crossing the blinds. He entered, gun ready. "Sheriff!" he called. No answer. He moved deeper, boots creaking on the old wooden floor. The air smelled faintly of whiskey and burnt coffee. A faint light glowed from the office. Earl sat slumped in his chair, head tilted back, eyes half open. For a moment, Luke thought he was asleep, until he saw the dark bloom of blood spreading across the sheriff's chest. His service pistol lay on the floor. A single shell casing glimmered under the desk. Luke's stomach turned. "No," he whispered. Then a voice spoke from behind him, calm and almost regretful. He made the wrong call? Luke spun around. A woman stood in the doorway, hands raised loosely, a pistol dangling from her right hand. She was tall, mid-30s, wearing a long black coat and gray gloves. Her hair was dark brown, cut to her shoulders, framing sharp cheekbones and unreadable hazel eyes. She looked like someone used to commanding rooms, not standing in them quietly. "Name's Agent Mara Keene," she said, showing a badge from the Department of Homeland Security. "I've been tracking Silas Blackwood for 2 years. Your sheriff was working both sides. When I pressed him for the file, he went for his gun." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes did. Luke stared at her. "You killed him." "I defended myself." She took a slow step closer. "You're Luke Collins, right? SEAL, retired. You've been in every report I've read since Silver Ridge went bad." Luke didn't answer. His gaze flicked to the blood, then to her weapon. "You working with Blackwood, too?" "No," she said sharply. "I'm trying to bring him down. But you just complicated things by taking out 3 of his mercenaries in the forest." She holstered her gun. "Now he knows where you are, and he's sending the rest." Through the cracked blinds, Luke saw headlights cresting the hill, dozens of them, SUVs, trucks, all black. Engines growled like thunder rolling across the snow. He turned to Mara. "How many?" "Enough to wipe this town off the map," she said quietly. Luke chambered around. Ranger let out a low growl, muscles tensed. "Then we don't wait," Luke said. "We fight." The windows trembled as the first explosion sounded in the distance. The night burned white. Snow swept sideways through the main street of Silver Ridge, carving spirals in the headlights of the incoming convoy. Engines roared, echoing off the walls of shuttered houses. Luke Collins stood at the front window of the police station, rifle slung over his shoulder, his wounded arm bound tightly under his coat. His breath fogged the glass. Ranger stood beside him, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the hill where black SUVs crept closer like steel beasts in the storm. Behind Luke, Agent Mara Keene reloaded her weapon, calm but tense. Her face, framed by brown hair now damp with melting snow, was pale under the flickering fluorescent light. "They're spreading out," she said. "At least 15 vehicles." Luke nodded. "Then we keep them funneled through Main Street, no open flanks." He turned to her, his voice even. "You still trust me?" Mara gave a short, humorless laugh. "Trust is a luxury, but I believe in what I see." She snapped the magazine into place. "And what I see is a man who doesn't quit." Luke's radio crackled suddenly, a voice distant and mocking. "Brave of you to stay, Collins. I almost respect it." Silas Blackwood. His tone was calm, almost elegant, as if addressing an audience rather than a target. "Step outside. Let's end this quietly. No more blood, no more collateral." Luke picked up the receiver. "You're already too late. You made this town bleed. Now it bleeds you back." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "You always talk like a soldier trying to sound noble, still playing hero in a world that stopped believing in heroes." The line went dead. Outside, the first explosions began. Fire bloomed at the edge of the street as grenades tore through the snow, sending showers of ice into the air. Mara ducked low, pulling Luke down beside her. "They've got drones!" she shouted over the roar. Luke peeked out the window. Small quadcopters hovered in the blizzard, red lights blinking through the snow. "EMP grenades in the evidence locker," he said. "Bottom shelf." Mara dashed for them, while Luke fired 2 precise shots, taking down the front line of foot soldiers advancing behind the SUVs. Ranger barked once, loud and sharp, then sprinted toward the back door where a side group was breaching. The next minutes were chaos. Luke moved with the efficiency of a man born in war, switching between cover points, counting ammunition, every shot placed like a heartbeat. Mara fought beside him, her movement sharp and surgical. Despite her composure, her hands trembled when she reloaded, a sign of someone who'd spent too long behind desks and reports, not gunfire. She steadied herself by copying Luke's breathing rhythm. "In through the nose, out through the mouth," he reminded quietly. "Don't think, just move." She nodded. At the rear exit, Ranger met the first intruder head-on, a man in black armor with a submachine gun. The German shepherd leapt, jaws clamping onto the man's forearm, forcing him to drop the weapon. The man fell back, yelling. Ranger growled, deep and guttural, before Luke's command, "Down!" made him retreat behind cover. The dog's flank was bleeding from a graze, but his eyes still burned fierce. A new voice called from the storm outside, rough and too familiar. "Collins!" It was Drake Holler, Silas's right hand, his broad figure appearing through the smoke. Snow crusted on his beard, his eyes wild with adrenaline. "Silas wants you alive, but I ain't picky." He fired, bullets tearing through the front wall. Luke rolled behind a desk, returned fire, hitting the man in the shoulder. Drake roared but didn't fall, charging forward like a bull. The impact shattered the desk, sending Luke to the floor. The two men grappled, fists and fury colliding. Drake's strength was monstrous, his muscles bunching under the black coat, but Luke fought with precision. He used Drake's momentum, twisting, striking the old wound on the man's arm. A sharp crack. Drake's elbow snapped. The mercenary swung wildly, catching Luke's face with a glancing blow before Luke drove a combat knife into his thigh. Drake staggered, eyes wide with shock, then collapsed, cursing through clenched teeth. Mara appeared, rifle raised. "Down!" she shouted, and Luke ducked as she fired past him. A drone exploded mid-air, scattering sparks across the snow. "They're retreating to regroup," she said. Luke wiped the blood from his mouth. Not for long. Through the chaos, one vehicle kept moving, an armored SUV rolling steadily forward until it stopped directly across from the station. The door opened, and Silas Blackwood stepped out. He looked almost serene against the violence, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a black overcoat that the wind couldn't seem to touch. His gray eyes swept the destruction like a painter admiring his own work. He carried no visible weapon, only a small earpiece and the air of a man who had never needed to pull a trigger himself. Mara's breath caught. "He's here." Luke chambered another round. "Then this ends now." He stepped out into the snow. The cold slammed into him like a wall, the wind cutting through his coat. Silas watched him approach, unflinching. "You could have been useful," Silas said. "A soldier like you, disciplined, loyal. Instead, you play martyr for a town that will forget your name by spring." Luke stopped 5 yards away. "Maybe," he said, "but at least I'll still have a name." He fired. The shot shattered the quiet. Silas staggered back, clutching his side. Mara fired at the same time, hitting the SUV's driver as he reached for a weapon. Chaos erupted once more. Silas fell to his knees, blood blooming across the white snow. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "Men like me don't die. We multiply." Luke stared down at him. "Then I'll keep cutting the roots until there's nothing left." He raised his rifle again, but Silas's eyes went glassy before he could pull the trigger. The gunfire faded. The surviving mercenaries fled into the storm, abandoning their fallen leader. Mara lowered her weapon, breathing hard. Luke knelt beside Ranger, checking his wound. It was shallow, thank God. The dog licked his hand weakly, tail thumping once. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Back up, finally. By dawn, the snow had stopped. The town lay half buried, silent except for the crackle of fire dying near the police station. Luke sat on the steps, staring at the gray horizon. Mara stood beside him, wrapped in a blanket one of the locals had brought. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes hollow but alive. "What now?" she asked. Luke glanced toward the rising sun. "You rebuild," he said quietly. "You tell the truth, and you make sure men like him don't crawl back." She studied him for a long moment. "And you?" "I've got repairs to make." He looked toward the distance where the roof of the bakery still stood beneath snow. "And family waiting." Later that morning, Emma and Lily appeared through the mist. Lily ran straight to Ranger, wrapping her arms around the big dog's neck. Emma froze when she saw Luke, bruised, bleeding, but alive. Tears filled her eyes as she reached him. You came back." He smiled faintly. "I always do." The church bells began to ring, faint, trembling through the cold air. Above them, the storm clouds finally broke, letting through a single shaft of golden light that struck the ruined street. It glowed on the snow, on the faces of the survivors, on Ranger's scarred fur. Luke closed his eyes, whispered a prayer only he could hear, and for the first time in years, Silver Ridge felt warm again. When the storm cleared over Silver Ridge, what remained was not just snow and silence, it was grace. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm around us. He calms the storm within us so we can stand through it. Luke's courage, Emma's faith, and Ranger's loyalty remind us that miracles aren't always thunder and light. Sometimes they're the quiet strength that helps us keep going when we have every reason to give up. In our own lives, there are Silas moments, days when fear and darkness try to claim us, when we feel alone in the fight. But just like Luke, we are never truly alone. God places his warriors beside us, a friend, a stranger, a loyal pet, or a whisper of peace in our hearts. The same hand that parted the seas still moves through every act of courage, every prayer whispered in the dark. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it. Let someone else feel that light too. Leave a comment below to tell us how God has worked through your own storms. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue to bring you stories that lift your spirit and renew your faith. May the Lord bless you and your family, protect your home, and guide you through every trial. And if you believe that even the smallest light can break the deepest night, type Amen in the comments below.